It's the Matt Bubala Show on 720 WGN. Well, the presidential debate has been talked to death in the last week. It happened on Monday, and here we are already on the weekend. Looking forward to the vice presidential debate coming up on Tuesday, and then Hillary and Donald will get back together next Sunday for the second go-around. Joining us on the phone to chat about it is the man we talked with before the first debate, Professor Jeff McCall from DePauw University. Hey, Professor, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you, Matt.
All right, what's your quick takeaway from round one?
Well, I don't think round one was a great event for democracy when you get right down to it. There was a nasty tone, obviously, amongst the two candidates, but I think the main thing is that we really never got into a genuine dialogue about the important topics that face the nation. And in some ways, I looked at this as kind of playing small ball. We were distracted by birther stuff and, who's right on a criminal statistic, and we ended up talking about a buting contestant and, what happened with his business practices, some 30 years ago. That's Trump's business practices. And it just struck me that we probably weren't talking about the issues that are most important in helping us decide who should be president.
Do you think that was uncommon for a presidential debate? Was it more cantankerous than, say, some of our other recent debates going back the last 20, 30 years?
Oh, I think it probably was more cantankerous than most recent debates because, even with Obama-Romney and Obama-McCain, clearly they had their differences, but I don't think we had, the sense of interruption and the kind of nasty tone and the nitpicking on small issues. And certainly if you go back, to Kennedy-Nixon, and of course then there was a hiatus of debates for a while, but then the debates began again with Carter and Ford, and then we had Carter and Reagan. The tone of all those debates was so much different, and there's more decorum and I think more statesmanship, and I think it would help the nation at a particularly polarized time and a time when there's a lot of confusion about the political process. I think it would be nice if our leaders would try to up their game a little bit and show a little bit more dignity in the public arena.
Well, I'm assuming that most of that is being aimed at Donald Trump, and I would ask, is that just kind of what if we're going to have a candidate who's not a political lifer, who's not somebody who's done these debates before, who's coming in as an outsider, and that's his, one of his stances is, hey, I'm not a politician, I'm not owned by anybody, I'm here to just tell it like it is. I imagine some of that's going to come along with that, right?
Yeah, I would say so, and I would also say that, my comments are directed at Trump, a good part, but Hillary's not innocent in this matter either. I mean, she talked about Donald, you live in your own reality, and I'm going to get blamed for everything, and she was, smiling and goading him on, and she brought up at the end, of course, about the beauty contestants and, picking on him about he didn't pay some contractor for a business deal 30 years ago. So, I mean, she kind of got into the small ball. Now, she got it to her advantage because she had him on defense. So, I mean, in a sense, he ended up having to try to explain stuff away. And honestly, the more he talked, the more he was losing. But it did tend to distract us. So, I mean, even though he was more likely to interrupt and look flustered, she kind of participated in helping set an agenda that was not productive and led to a nasty tone that distracted us from some of the current issues that I think are important. And, you might find this interesting. Fox News did a poll a couple of weeks ago where they asked people, what are the most important issues facing the country? Well, number one was the economy. Well, they talked about that only really in the first, 10 or 12 minutes. But after that, we've got terrorism, education, health care, the federal deficit, and race relations. And of all the rest of the stuff on that list, race relations was really the only thing that came up in a significant manner. They didn't really talk about health care. They didn't say much about education. And honestly, I think one of the biggest issues in the whole campaign will be the ability of the next president to appoint people to the Supreme Court, and that never got raised either. Now, I mean, there are more debates in which those issues could come up, but I would think for the first one we need to get to some of those, and honestly, there are going to be more people watching the first one than probably the subsequent ones, so I think the first one is important to help set the tone and the agenda of what the campaign's going to be based on.
So on some of those points, it's a lose for Donald Trump, too, because, the Supreme Court would be a place where he can make grounds with conservative voters, right? He can say, do you want her selecting these next possible Supreme Court justices? And so he never got her to that. But when she's bringing up the way he treats women or his business dealings. Isn't that fair? I mean, I know that's maybe not one of the most major issues when you look at everything that America has to deal with, but when we're electing somebody to be president, I would think that's fair game in how they treat people, how they act, how they would represent our country.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's fair, and it's certainly to her advantage politically. But again, I still would say that the issues in front of the nation right now go beyond what happened with a beauty contestant, 2 decades ago. And I would think that, I'm not trying to defend Trump in this regard, but I would think that he needs to engage this rhetoric in a way to say, I want to talk about where we're going now, and I want to talk about my view of the country now. And the more he's trying to play defense on issues that are, in a sense, sideshows from the past, I don't think it helps him. And the odd thing is, of course, Hillary's complaining to Trump about how he treated a beauty contestant or what he said about her. Trump really missed an opportunity, I think, to just say, your record with how we treat women with respect maybe isn't so helpful either. I mean, I know Trump was just probably itching to bring up, some of the intern stuff from the past, and he didn't. But I think he could have, in a at least halfway decorous fashion, mentioned, you aren't necessarily so innocent with regard to your role in helping empower and promote women either.
That would have been interesting. He was very proud of himself afterwards for not bringing it up. He applauded himself that Chelsea was in the room, and I have great respect for Chelsea, so I didn't want to do that and bring up, Bill's whatever at the time. Do you think that is a point he can really make traction on? Because I think that people will come up with what she said about women that were accusing Bill and things like that. I don't know if that's going to stick as well as her being able to say, I stood by my husband. We went through tough times. We fought to make our marriage work. We don't just cut and run like you've done 3 times or something like that. I mean, is that a place for him to really go without her still being able to gain points?
No, if I were Trump, I'd get off of this issue altogether. And, he's not going to win very many points by trying to convince people that he showed restraint on that one occasion because he hasn't shown restraint in many things. And even since that debate, he's been in public venues where he's been bringing up, Bill's infidelities and that sort of thing. So, yeah. I mean, I just think that, if you want to talk about who can best solve the nation's issues, you've got to talk about the nation's issues. And I didn't see a lot of that in the debate, and really not that much of it even since.
Yeah, we're speaking with Professor Jeff McCall. He is the professor of media studies at DePauw. Follow him on Twitter at Prof_McCall. We got to get you a better handle than that. It's tough to read that one off,
That is tough, yeah.
We were talking about the debate, of course. We're waiting for the next one, but we're still dissecting the last one. So part of the debate is what points do you score on policies and issues and how do you come off? And so much of what has been talked about, I would say, in the week afterwards is, and a lot of people saying that Donald Trump won. And I wonder how, I'm not a Trump fan at all, and he won't be getting my vote. Neither will the Chicago Tribune editorial endorsement of Gary Johnson be getting my vote. But that's a separate story. But I will say that so much of people saying Hillary won, Hillary won, Hillary won, I wonder where does that go to? Trump did not lose any of his supporters. Hillary did not lose any of her supporters. So we get into this middle ground of people who are there's 2 possibilities, I would say, right? There's the people that were lightly supporting somebody who maybe could be swayed, and the people who somehow haven't decided what they want to do yet and are going to make a decision maybe based on these things they see. And did she really? I guess she won those. I guess on that standard, I would say, yeah, she won. She looked more presidential. She looked more focused. She didn't interrupt all the time. She wasn't sniffling like crazy. How important is the demeanor and knowing that there's a split screen and how you're reacting? I feel like that really cost Al Gore in his race against George W. Bush. That, George W. came off as a guy you'd kind of like to be around, and Al came off as this really smart guy who's got a lot of ideas, but, oh, my God, I'm going to fall asleep listening to him. And to me, that made all the difference in that election. Yeah,
I would think if you watched the Clinton and Trump debate with the sound down on the television, you would probably think that Hillary made the better impression. And part of that is she was more composed, and her nonverbals were, less identifiable. And, television is a visual medium. And, people get a lot of cues from what they just see through kind of the emotional, lens that is television. And if you just watch Trump's mannerisms, he clearly was flabbergasted at times and frustrated at times. Early in the debate in particular, you could hear him sniffing, which people, reacted to through social media.
Yeah.
And, there could be any number of reasons for that, but it was still a distraction. But Hillary was more polished in terms of her command of facts, and part of that is just, I'm sure she spent time memorizing and researching in ways that Trump is not prone to do. But for voters who haven't made up their mind or maybe are slightly in favor of one or the other, that might impress them in ways that Trump's rather brawling and inconsistent style would maybe not convince them. But I think you made an interesting point. For the people who are really Trump supporters, I don't think there's anything Hillary could have done that would convince them to not support Trump. And I think the other way around, for the people who want to vote the other direction, they're going to do that. And interestingly, that there seems to be a rather small sliver in the middle this year compared to some years of people who are undecided. And I think for some of those folks watching this debate might have just convinced them just not to go at all to the polls, that they might just have been turned off by the whole debacle enough that this could actually suppress turnout when you get right down to it.
I wonder about that, and I've talked about that a little bit on the show, that I'm wondering if this is going to be the presidential election where the candidates have drawn the most scorn ever. We've now had the most watched debate ever, but will it be one of the lowest voter turnouts ever? And I do wonder how that's going to play out. I mean, we'll talk about this in the next half hour, but the Tribune today endorsed Gary Johnson, saying that here's the one way you can vote and feel good about it, even though they write that, Trump is so unfit to be president and Hillary is fit to be president. They still said, but we can't condone either, and we're going to go this way. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out in the end. Are people going to stay away? Are people going to vote third party? Who's that truly going to hurt? When the last, I think, really major third-party candidate would have been Ross Perot, right? And he, if you could argue, cost George H., a re-election and gave Bill Clinton the White House.
That's pretty much true, because people forget that Bill Clinton won the White House twice, and on neither occasion did he win a majority of the popular vote, because the third-party candidate took enough votes that it kept Clinton under 50% both times. Although I think it's maybe worth pointing out another third-party candidate, Ralph Nader, who may have taken enough votes away from Gore to keep him out of the White House. And Nader was not the factor that Ross Perot was on a national basis, but he still had a following, and most of the people that he took would clearly have been Gore supporters rather than George W. Bush.
Yeah, and when we look at that one and how close that one came down, and there was another candidate, I forget who it was, who got a ton of votes in Florida that even he said, I can't remember who it was, like a fourth-party candidate or fifth-party candidate. He's like, yeah, there's no way those votes were really for me, that there were mistakes made. But So as we look at this now and getting through this first debate and what we see out of it, what would you say going forward into the second debate? The second debate is a town hall meeting style. So Anderson Cooper and another moderator, and there's going to be half of it is going to be moderator asked questions, half of it's going to be town hall. People submit their questions and they get chosen and asked. What do you see happening here, and what needs to be done differently by either candidate?
Well, interestingly, I think Trump has an opportunity in this next format to come off as more human and interactive, because he is used to going to his campaign rallies and talking off the cuff. Mm-hmm. Hillary very seldom is unscripted, and she has shown in the unscripted times that she has had to be a little stuffy and bureaucratic sounding. And that might not go over well on town hall format, where people, who, quote unquote, average people, are going to ask questions and want to hear, a human being interact with them. So this could work to Trump's advantage, but he's going to have to be disciplined, and he's going to have to prepare, and he's going to have anecdotes to share. And there are two things: he can't talk about himself all the time, and he can't defend himself against Hillary all the time. If he wants to make hay in this format, he's got to talk about solid issues and address the human beings that will be in front of him, and that includes the moderators, of course.
That's going to be really tough for him, I would think. I mean, it's just his way. He talks about himself. He brags about himself incessantly, and clearly feels most comfortable in a way doing that type of thing. And I think Hillary, I would imagine, her people are saying, keep goading him into snapping back at you, into interrupting you. It made him look bad, and that's what was talked about so much afterwards. And I wonder how much Donald Trump can be coached to sit on the sidelines and say, okay, let her have her say. I'll get my chance in a second. Just let her spit it out. I mean, I can't see him doing that.
Clearly, the Hillary people are more strategic in their approach. And my guess is people like Kellyanne Conway, who's Trump's campaign coordinator, has enough sense to know what he needs to do and can give him the coaching. The big question is, will he listen? And I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Hillary's is so, and, you say this is more of an unscripted, in a way that first debate's unscripted too. They ask the question and then the candidates run off with whatever answer they want. It's not necessarily about the question. So, and there's so much responding to each other that it's off the script but prepared. Donald seemed more just off script, and I'm going to say what I want to say. Hillary, every time, seemed prepared to have something to say back. And I think that hurts her at some points too. Like, it could benefit Trump in some ways. He probably doesn't play it right to let it. But for Hillary, I would say some of the problems with her being so scripted, so prepared, is she's not really listening sometimes to what Trump is saying. Because I felt there were a few opportunities in that first debate where she could have come back with something, but instead I think she was thinking about, okay, this soundbite will work here, and being maybe a little too calculated instead of really hearing what he's saying and then jumping back on him. Like when she said, I think he's giving me a hard time for preparing for this. And you know what? I'm prepared to be the president. Clearly that was planned out and waiting for the right moment, right? So there's, when you talk about humanizing yourselves, Hillary doesn't do that very well because it's so prepared, so scripted, so Al Gore.
Which is exactly why she has not been able to put this race away, even with all the advantages she has and the self-destruction going on at times in the Trump campaign. Hillary has not put this race away because she does come off as scripted and wonkish and, I dare say, establishment. And, Trump, really needs to exploit that if he wants to, quote-unquote, win the debate this next time around. But she clearly has done her research. Her staff has trained her to say, here are the points we're going to raise, here's how we're going to say them, and we're not going to say anything else. And in that regard, she's disciplined, and he didn't demonstrate that.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. How much do you see him changing his tone? Do you see him being able to, because here's what I would coach. If I was coaching Trump, I would say, okay, I know you're not going to hold off the whole debate and never interrupt. So here's how you do it. When you feel like you have to say something, you say, you know what, Anderson, I've been told to death to quit interrupting Hillary, that it makes me look terrible. But how can I sit here and listen to these lies? Something like that to address the fact that I know I'm interrupting. But here's the thing. How long would you sit back and take just terrible lies about what you did or what you planned or what they did before you stepped up and defended yourself? America needs to be defended. And then he launches, that's how I think he's got to handle it if it's going to work.
Yeah, Matt, your rhetorical approach would be great. Now, whether Trump is willing to do that or not, I don't know. And, Reagan was the great counterpuncher. When Carter would say things, Reagan would look, slightly amused. And then his famous line in that debate was, there you go again, pretty much said it all at that time. And again, that's been a long time. And, interestingly enough, the Reagan-Carter debate, there was only one of those back in 1980 because they had trouble getting negotiations organized, and it wasn't until very late in the game that they had their debate. And Reagan trailed in a lot of polls early in the fall. And there was movement late. Now, we don't know directly whether that was a result of the debate, but certainly Reagan standing toe-to-toe, being able to defend himself without coming off as rude, made a tremendous impression. And I think what you've just said there, Trump has to be able to stand up for himself, but he can't come off as boorish, and he can't just interrupt with one or two-word, blast, so to speak, that shows that he's really not thinking this thing through, but rather reacting emotionally. And that's pretty much what he did the last time.
I mean, all Trump has to really do is hang on, right? I mean, to me, everybody says, oh, Hillary won that debate. Hillary only wins by getting a 10-point lead in the polls, in my estimation. by him hanging on, by him not crapping his drawers on a national stage, he won. Like he always said, I could kill somebody on Fifth Avenue, people still vote for me. By him just not throwing up on stage, he still, in essence, in a way, wins that debate. Here's a guy that doesn't know how to debate, doesn't have a grasp on the issues like Hillary does, doesn't have everything politically that she has, just has his tone and his brash demeanor. And he was still able to be up there and I think walk away. I know he lost, but the polls aren't showing, the polls, she got a bump, but it's not like people are saying, oh my God, this is completely over now. I mean, I think people want to say that on one side, but I don't think it's there. I think by him just sticking around and taking the punches, he's like Rocky sticking around till the end, where hopefully then he can land a miracle and things go his way.
Oh, yeah. If people think that this first debate was decisive to put the race away for Hillary, I think they're misinformed, even though I think by most accounts Hillary was more polished and, quote unquote, again, won the debate. That Trump stood there and got through it, helps him out. And people need to remember that last time around, Romney really dominated the first debate over Obama.
Right.
But, it didn't affect in the polls. And people, and again, going back to 1984, Walter Mondale looked great against Ronald Reagan in the first debate they had. But Reagan rallied, looked, good enough in the last couple, and won the election. So one debate does not an election make. And Hillary, I'm sure, even though she feels glad with how things went the first time, there's no guarantee it will work that way the second time, and it certainly doesn't put the race away.
You brought up the Reagan-Carter debate. They only had one that year, and I just saw an interesting report this week about, previous debates in the history, and I was stunned because I was young at the time. I never knew much about. I didn't know they only had one debate. I never saw their debate. But there was a story that there was a scandal in that somebody on Reagan's team or side got either access to videotape or transcript, something of Carter's preparation for the debate. And so it was like they had their playbook and were able to use that leading into that debate. Have you heard about that and read about that?
Well, I did hear that one time. I mean, I don't know how much legitimacy there is to that, but I would say this. The Reagan communications people were very sharp and very strategic, and they probably could have sorted out what they needed to do and anticipated much of what Carter was going to say, even had they not. So the fact that they came off in a great debate and Reagan had his great lines and his demeanor was so good, it could have been based on some inside, scouting, but they wouldn't have needed it, I don't think, for the caliber of people he had working for him at that time.
Well, it's going to be interesting. We've got the next couple, and real quick, the vice presidential debate. I'm glossing over that because I don't really care. Not that I don't care, but I think I don't imagine it. I don't imagine it making a difference in the needle movement really either way.
I think you're right. It won't. People will be interested to see what the two candidates look like, but people are not going to go to the polls and vote based on what Tim Kaine or Mike Pence says on Tuesday.
And you know what? One last thing. So we talked so much about the debate, and did you win the debate? How'd you do in the debate? What's the impression of the debate? And that's where close to 100 million people were that one night. And what's your guess on the second debate? Half that audience, maybe? Do you think they?
I think we'll do better than. They ended up with about 84 million confirmed, and it's a little hard to tell in terms of some of the streaming and whatnot. I think they'll be in the 60s probably, which will put it back kind of in the Romney-Obama category. So I think there'll be a substantial audience. But a lot of the people who are just curiosity seekers will okay, I've seen these two people, what's all the excitement? Yeah. And they'll move on and watch a ball game or something.
So I wonder, if Trump lost the debate, give or take whatever from the debate, what about the next week? Did he win or lose this week? And that's where I wonder if he hurt himself more. I think the debate was relatively okay, but it's the mic was bad. It was rigged. It was walking off the stage saying Lester Holt was fine, and the next day Lester Holt was awful, and he was with Hillary and them lambasting them. His tweet attacks on this Miss Universe, talk about falling for Hillary's bait. And now saying, she was disgusting. She was one of those people we ever had. She gained all this weight. It was a real problem. That can't be helping him, I would think. I would think his camp is like, stop with the Twitter already.
No, he took the bait, and he's been running with it all week. And the news coverage since the debate has probably been more harmful to him than what happened at the debate. Because, again, he's been trying to explain things that happened during the debate. And it would have been better to say nothing. Now, by the way, I don't think Lester Holt had his best moment trying to be the moderator of this debate. I think he got off on tangents himself, and I think he got run over by both candidates at times because he didn't enforce his own rules. But once it's over, Trump has nothing to gain by criticizing Lester Holt, who's a professionally recognized newsman, and he certainly has nothing to gain by talking about a beauty contestant years after. He needs to get back to the issues that seem to resonate with his supporters and people who might still be undecided. That would be the economy, terrorism, health care, federal deficit.
It will be fascinating. We're less than 40 days away. It's coming up soon, but there's a lot to do in the meantime. Professor McCall, we'll talk to you again soon, okay?
I hope so. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt Bubala with you, 720 WGN.